Though the concept of national borders is rejected by many, with some even denouncing the very idea of borders between nations as racist at both principled and practical levels, however, secure borders are not only defensible, but essential. More than any other single concept, the foundational principle of the American regime is the principle of natural equality. Quote, that all men are created equal, end quote, is the first of the, quote, self-evident truths, end quote, proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence. In his 1791 Lectures on Law, James Wilson explains that this equality does not extend to, quote, to their virtues, their talents, their dispositions, or their acquirements, end quote, but only that, quote, the natural rights and duties of man belong equally to all, end quote. This equality of rights originates in, quote, the law of nature and of nature's God, end quote, and is inherent in our humanity and not dependent on any regime or government. The political corollary of the equality principle is the principle of government by consent. Abraham Lincoln describes this as, quote, the sheet anchor of American republicanism, end quote, and, quote, our ancient faith, end quote. Precisely because all men are created equal, no man has the right to govern any other man without the other's consent. No one is inherently superior to anyone else in his right to govern. All legitimate political relationships between equal human beings must be on the basis of consent. This principle of consent is directly applicable to immigration and border security. If borders are insecure, then people may enter into a country without the consent of those who already comprise that country. It would be as if a homeowner had no right to prevent random people from simply walking in the front door, plopping themselves down on the couch, and claiming to live there now. A property owner has a right to control ingress into his property. A nation is the collective property of all its citizens who have consented to live with one another. If a random person could force himself on the people of a country without their consent, then that is not a relationship of equals. It is instead tyranny. Not only is a nation without secure borders subject to the arbitrary whim of whomever may choose to impose himself upon it, that nation also has no control over what comes across its borders. There is overwhelming evidence that huge quantities of illegal narcotics, such as fentanyl, have been pouring across America's porous southern border. Other problems are known to occur, such as increased rates of diseases like polio and tuberculosis. Finally, an insecure border is an invitation to engage in international human trafficking, and the practice is epidemic at the U.S.-Mexico border. In short, a nation which does not have secure borders is not really a sovereign nation at all. The power to protect the integrity of America's borders is embedded in the United States Constitution in at least two places. First, Article 1, Section 8 states that Congress, quote, shall have power to define and punish offenses against the law of nations, end quote. Borders and immigration of non-citizens across those borders were understood by America's founders to be a law of nations issue and are thus covered by this clause. Second, Article 1, Section 9, the infamous, quote, importation clause, end quote, creates a, quote, negative pregnant, end quote, implying that in the absence of one very specific set of conditions, Congress may regulate, quote, migration, end quote, into the United States, not just the, quote, importation, end quote, of enslaved persons, as being addressed by the founders at the time of writing the Constitution. They wanted to continually reduce and end the scourge of slavery in the United States while preserving the Union and without fomenting war between the states over controversial issues. With this understanding by the founders, how would it be possible to maintain what makes America its own nation, able to self-govern, apart from any dictatorship that could take hold? As President John Adams wrote, quote, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other, end quote, meaning that the nation of Americans possess a specifically chosen cultural infrastructure, and the American people have historically adopted certain moral values. that make its system of constitutional self-government possible. This system in turn makes it possible for Americans to enjoy their natural rights. Other peoples and other cultures antithetical to that system of government are thus a mortal threat to America's political system and way of life. And Jefferson cautioned against a mass influx of peoples with opposing cultures and values to those of America in Notes on the State of Virginia. The ultimate tendency of the obliteration of borders is the obliteration of the very idea of sovereign nations. In Federalist 10, James Madison argues for the viability and desirability of a large republic, but even this has its limits. The limits of communication and transportation cannot be completely overcome, and there's more to a self-governing political society than that. The competing interests of society must have something to unite them. Madison also notes in Federalist 10 that, quote, justice ought to hold the balance between them, end quote. In order to constitute a true political society, a regime, they must share something fundamental, which Aristotle at the outset of the political calls the, quote, good, end quote. The natural and inherent differences in people's thinking about ideas such as what is good and just means that the peoples of the world will never agree on them perfectly, and they can thus never come together into one regime on principles of justice. The result will either be tyranny or anarchy, as philosophers as diverse as Leo Strauss and John Rawls have noted. The destruction of sovereign nations does not signify the dawn of universal justice. It rather heralds the establishment of universal tyranny. Secure borders, then, are a necessary precondition of liberty and self-government. It allows us to distinguish between those who are members of our political community and those who are not. It allows people who share conceptions of justice and good to congregate into one political community and govern themselves according to those conceptions. Secure borders allow Americans to preserve the cultural infrastructure that makes the United States version of free self-government possible. The concept of secure borders is embedded in both American principles and constitutionalism. The destruction of secure borders would be a catastrophe for the American Republic. This essay was written by Kevin Portteus. Kevin Portteus is a professor of politics, director of American Studies, and the Lawrence Fertig Chair in Politics at Hillsdale College. I am Janine Turner, founder of Constituting America. I and Kathy Gillespie, Constituting America's CEO, thank you for joining us for our 13th annual 90-day study. Our annual studies are entitled 90 plus 90 equals 180. History holds the key to the future, because history does hold the key to the future, or as Shakespeare said, the past is prologue. Join us tomorrow. Right back here, same bat channel, same bat time, for those of you who are as old as I and watched Batman, the TV show. Don't forget to check out our essays on American exceptionalism. It's our study from last year. If you go to the constitutingamerica.org and scroll down, you'll see the studies, and you'll see a little red button that says American Exceptionalism Study. Really good, so that we have 90 days of 90 tools in our toolbox so that we can have a really good civil civic conversation about why America is exceptional. Have a great day. We thank Amanda Hughes for championing these wonderful studies, and for Bobby Rodriguez for editing these wonderful essays and sending them out there into the universe. Have a wonderful day.